Hello, and welcome to New Hampshire Unscripted. My name is Kevin Collins. I'm sitting in for Ray Dudley, who is busy doing Christmas Carol up in Laconia. And just to know that we're on WKXL 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord, and 101.9 FM in Manchester. And this show is sponsored by Lakes Region Fence. A bit of a background about me and Ray. I have known Ray for over 50 years. Our first show we did back in 1973, As You Like It by Shakespeare. And he and I have been friends ever since. And right now, as I said, he's busy doing Christmas Carol up in the Colonial Theater in Laconia. And it runs...
Actually, he's doing it in Lincoln.
In Lincoln. Sorry about that.
No big deal.
The wrong one.
Yeah, there's two of them. I know there's so many Christmas carols.
Yes, sir. So it runs Friday, December 13th, till Sunday, December 15th. And when you get a chance, please check out the theater in Lincoln. And believe me, it's a brilliant performance by Ray, who has always been terrific in everything he's done. So he asked me to sit in for him, and I thought I would talk about the things that I am most familiar with when it comes to theater and the arts, and that is high school students. I started out as a theater major when I was in my 20s, and I got my master's degree at the University of Connecticut, Master of Fine Arts. And I realized in my late 20s that I really didn't want to go down to New York and live hand to mouth and, four guys to a room and wait tables trying to wait for that big break. So I took my degree with my background in theater and I became a high school teacher. And I taught at, interestingly enough, an all-girls Catholic school in Boston, Massachusetts, actually in Brighton, Massachusetts, called Mount St. Joseph Academy. And they asked me to direct the plays there. The difficulty was one year, dealing with an all-girls school, is that there aren't a heck of a lot of plays for all girls. There's only so many times you can do 12 Angry Women over and over again. So I started to write my own. And that actually had two important influences on me, because one, it forced me to come to grips with the people in front of me that I was teaching, and also come to grips with my own experience as a teenager. So the plays I wrote were a series of vignettes, mostly about growing up, about dealing with the things that young women deal with. Later on, when I taught at a co-ed Catholic school, I did the same thing, but then I was able to explore what it meant to be a teenager regardless of gender. So at any rate, so when I began to write plays, I also began to explore the gap between myself and them. That's an important thing to understand, is that when you're a teacher, the students in front of you, especially in high school, they're always going to be between 14 and 18. And you're getting a year older every year. And as a result, that gap between you and the students gets bigger and bigger. And in a sense, they become stranger and stranger, or perhaps you become stranger and stranger. So in addition to writing the plays, which I explored that gap between me and them, I also explored the gap between every generation and the generation that follows it. So just a little bit of a background, because I became so enamored of this idea that I actually created a course called Contemporary American Studies. And the subtitle was, Who Are We and How Did We Get to Be This Way? And even though I started out writing about my own experiences or teaching about my own experiences, I began to explore more and more what the role of these young men and women were. So a bit of a background as to what, where the idea of the teenager came from, because one of the things that I began to realize is that the teenager is a relatively recent cultural construct. That there have always been people in their teenage years, but the idea of the teenager as a separate entity, as a unique individual with their own likes and dislikes and attitudes and angsts and fears, etc., really is a relatively recent origin, and it comes out of World War II. In World War, if you look at the movies before, say, 1955, if there's a teenager in it, it's like Andy Hardy. If you've ever seen the Mickey Rooney, Andy Hardy series, he's like a little man. He's wearing a hat and a double-breasted suit and a tie. He's acting, a little goofy because he is a teenager, but he's really not separate from his dad or the other adults, except that he's smaller and younger. He and Judy Garland are putting on shows, and they're interested in the same things that adults are interested in. Then, in World War II, I think this is kind of important to understand, the GI Bill of Rights created a new, that changed the society, it changed American society profoundly. There are three parts to the GI Bill of Rights. There's the VA mortgage, which was 1 or 2%, so that suddenly people could actually buy homes. People were moving to the suburbs in these new fangled suburban tract housing. The second thing was what was called the 5220 Club. $20 a week for a year, which back in the 1945, 1946 was a fortune, and you could live like a king. But the third and most important part was for every year that you were in service, you served in the military, you got 2 years of free tuition. It made no difference what college you went to or what kind of school you went to. You went to professional school for cooking or for barbering, or you could go to Harvard and MIT, assuming that you could get accepted. And what this meant was that the society moved from being primarily, if not exclusively, high school educated, because when you have a high school diploma, and that's the end of your education, the high school becomes a different concept than it is if it's a transitory experience before you get to college. So when people started to going more and more to college, high school became an entirely different entity. It became, as I said, a transitional period. Look at the old pictures of proms in the 1940s and early 1950s. The girls wear frilly dresses, and the music is a little bit simpler. And that's because the prom prior to the mid-1950s was a farewell to innocence, a farewell to youth, because once you graduate from high school, you have to get a job. You have to go to work. You have to raise a family. And so that's a big difference between that and what we know as high school now. And if you look at a prom in the modern day, if you happen to have the opportunity to go and see the parade of students in their dresses, they're very sophisticated. They're very sleek. They're very svelte. They're very adult. They're not like the dresses and the styles that were big before that, because this is not a farewell to innocence. The prom becomes for them an introduction to becoming an adult. So when you think about that, you realize that students who are in high school now have their own society, their own culture, their own background. And so when we think about that transition, where did the origin of the high school student come about? Most people would trace it back to James Dean. So if you know anything about James Dean, he made 3 films: East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. And the most influential one of all was Rebel Without a Cause, because prior to Rebel Without a Cause, you did not have the idea of this angst-ridden, rebellious high school student. And along comes James Dean with his style and his hair, etc. And everything about him became synonymous with being a high school student. And high school students at that time, they identified with James Dean. They identified with his style. They identified with the things that he believed in the way that he acted. And so, unfortunately, if you know anything about James Dean, he died in a car accident in 1955. And if he had not died, perhaps the cultural center of teenage life would be film. But shortly after he died, a guy from Memphis, Tennessee, by the name of Elvis Presley came out and pretty much took over that role. as the ideal, the idol of the high school, the teenager. Okay, we'll talk more about that when we come back. Welcome back. Once again, this is New Hampshire Unscripted on WKXL 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord, 101.9 FM in Manchester, and at nhtalkradio.com. We were talking a minute ago about the origin of the cultural construct of the American teenager, and I had said that it could have been film because of James Dean, but because of his untimely, tragic death, that shifted from movies to rock and roll. And what's interesting about that, when you have a kind of that kind of touchstone, you have to understand that it gave teenagers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s a common culture. And what I mean by that is that when I was growing up, I'm a baby boomer, I'm in my 70s. And when I was growing up, we identified with any other teenager of our era, no matter where they were from. We felt a connection to a teenager from Oregon, or a teenager from L.A., or a teenager from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Because we shared an awful lot of things, particularly music. And not only that, you realize that in those days, you really only had three kinds of music that we listened to. We listened to rock, folk, or Motown. Now, there were other genres of music. You know, as we grew older, we realized that we missed out on such great things as soul and country, etc. But back in the day, if you listened to Top 40, those were the three primary genres of music. And if you look at the films that were influenced primarily by the music of the time, you have West Side Story and Grease. And then when you get to the 1980s, you have the John Hughes films. So that if you want to look at the evolution of the high school student and the evolution of the teenager, you look at those four films, and you begin to see Rebel Without a Cause had no music. What music it had might have been jazz. West Side Story was a musical written by Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim, so therefore you had that kind of music. And then you shift over to Grease in the 1970s, and now it's a totally different genre, even though the characters are pretty much the same. You'd be hard-pressed to find a difference between Jim Stark, the main character that James Dean plays in Rebel Without a Cause, or Biff and Tony in West Side Story, or Danny Zuko in Grease, in terms of their looks, in terms of their attitude, in terms of their angst. But in terms of the music, things change entirely. Interestingly enough, I mentioned Leonard Bernstein having written West Side Story. He was asked once, who are the biggest, most important music of the 20th century? And the interviewer thought he was going to say Rachmaninoff or Stravinsky or something. And he said Elvis Presley. He said he's rewritten the vocabulary of music. So I think that if you need a professional opinion that might back up that thought that rock and roll really changed everything, you can look at Leonard Bernstein. There were other attempts. Just a bit of a side note. If you've ever seen the play Bye Bye Birdie, which was supposed to be ostensibly about Elvis Presley, you realize that they kind of missed the mark. There was an opportunity to sort of poke fun at Elvis Presley and sort of see him as a passing fad. But, of course, that really didn't happen. Anyway, going back to my point about the baby boomers and how we embraced the idea of the genres and the music that we liked. What happened since then? Because music has become incredibly fragmented. Before I came on, I decided to download a list of musical genres from a website just called Music Gen List. And there is 5 pages of so many different kinds of music that the young people today listen to. And so if you think that they have the same kind of unified, cohesive culture that we had, take a look at their music and you're going to see that it's not. For instance, alternative. There's alternative rock, college rock, experimental rock, goth rock, grunge, hardcore punk, hard rock, indie rock, new wave, progressive rock, punk, and shoegaze, whatever that is. If you were to look at dance, you have breakbeat, dubstep, exercise, garage, hardcore, hard dance, Eurodance, house, jackin' house, jungle, drum and bass, techno, and trance. In hip-hop, you have alternative rap, bounce, dirty south, East Coast rap, gangster rap, hardcore rap, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on and on forever, but you realize when you see things like that, how terribly fragmented the culture that today's high schoolers and teenagers have as opposed to the culture that we had. And the culture that we had was not only music, it was the fact that we only had 3 major networks. Nobody watched PBS when I was growing up except to learn French when you're in grammar school. But ABC, NBC, and CBS were all that we had. And at that time, if you wanted to watch a show that was culturally connection, you had to be in front of that TV the same day, the same time, every week. And when you were watching that show, so was everybody else. And every member of your circle when you were in high school, if you were watching the Monkees or you were watching Gilligan's Island, whatever, they were all experiencing the same thing at the same time. And when you think about the idea of teenagers, as I said, if the origin is rebel without a cause, the idea that teenagers associated with rebellion really was also part of that, because you begin to see in the 1970s when Norman Lear comes out with his shows, we all waited to see those because they were challenging the norms, which is something we thought that was originally just the bailiwick of the high school student, because rock and roll at its heart has always been rebellion, has always been rebellious. You know, that if your parents didn't yell to you to turn the volume down when you were a teenager back in the 1960s and 70s, then you weren't listening to the right kind of music. Today, if you're a parent, you're probably just as likely to tell your son or daughter to turn the music up rather than turn it down, because rock and roll has ceased to become a source of rebellion and angst. It might be a source of angst in terms of the individual, but not in terms of the relationship between the child and the adult. So, let me backtrack a bit and talk a bit about the whole concept of the generations. Some years ago, a couple of writers named Neil Howe and William Strauss wrote a book called Generations, in which they said that the history was cyclical, and that there were recognizable patterns among 4 generations, and those 4 generations took place over what they called a saeculum, saeculum, which was the average long lifetime of a human being. And you had the hero generation, which was followed by an artist generation, which was followed by a prophet generation, which was followed by a nomad generation. And if you want to look at the parallels there was that if you think about the hero generation, you think about World War II. World War II generation, their job was to solve the problems of the world, to come together, to join together, to trust institutions, to reinforce those institutions, and to solve the problems of the world. And that was the World War II generation, a hero generation. Their younger brothers and sisters were what was called the artist generation, the silent majority generation, and they really just simply were the followers of the hero generation. They so admired their older brothers and sisters that they just simply worshiped them. If the World War II generation were going to be leaders, the next generation, the silent generation, were going to be the supporters. Then the following generation is actually the sons and daughters of the World War II generation, the baby boomers, the countercultural baby boomers. And they were called the prophet generation. We'll come back to that in a bit. It's very complex. And don't forget that we're New Hampshire Talk Radio, and this is New Hampshire Unscripted. Please find us on WXKL 1450, 103.9 FM Concord, and 101.9 FM in Manchester. We'll be right back. Hello again, and welcome back to New Hampshire Unscripted. My name is Kevin Collins, and I'm covering for Ray Dudley. You will find us at WXKL 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord, 101.9 FM in Manchester, and on the internet at nhtalkradio.com. We were talking a minute ago about the generations as defined by Neil Howe and William Strauss. And I said that there were four basic generations that follow in a cycle. A hero generation, followed by an artist generation, followed by a prophet generation, followed by a nomad generation. And when we left off, I was saying that the World War II generation gave birth to the baby boomers, the prophet generation, who embraced a kind of spiritual view of the world. And if you think about Woodstock and hippies, etc., they were spiritual, not necessarily religious, but they were really into consciousness raising, etc. May have been with illicit things, but they were more interested in challenging the norms of the institution. Because if it didn't feel right, it must not be right. And they weren't really, and my generation wasn't particularly interested in the 9-to-5 job. What my generation claimed to want to have was something that they could devote themselves to. And that set us up as pretty much the foils to our parents' generation, which is unfortunate. We didn't really. I think, generally speaking, at the time in the 60s and the 70s, a lot of us didn't appreciate the sacrifices and the experiences that our parents had during World War II. We're much more attuned to that now and much more interested in those things that happen. And I think in lots of ways, our generation, my generation, that is, the baby boomers, seem to understand. In retrospect, much more about World War II than certainly we did when we were closer to it. And if you think about movies like Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers, Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks are both members of the baby boom generation, and they seem to grasp something, capture something in their films that perhaps the great films of World War II and the great stars of World War II, that is John Wayne and John Ford, seem to have missed, but that's something for another time. And following the baby boom generation would be what we call Generation X, and the reason why Generation X would be called a nomad generation is because they grew up at a time when my generation challenged everything. If the World War II generation established the institutions that the following generation, the younger brothers and sisters, embraced, and my generation challenged it and sort of tore up all the norms, the Generation X grew up in a period of time in which they say, well, nothing really matters. The norms would be broken because they were the latchkey kids, and as I said, the films that they watched were films by John Hughes, and that like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where things didn't, that the real key to being a good teenager is to simply ignore and not challenge the norms, just forget that they existed, and take a day off. And if you could outthink your parents, if you could outthink the man, you were a big star. After that, then we get the next generation, which was supposed to be a hero generation. I don't know if they will become a hero generation. Is the crop of millennials, and they're followed by Gen Z. How powerful? Just to backtrack once again, is this notion of the importance of a generation? If you think about the United States presidency, after World War II, almost every president up until Bill Clinton was a member of the World War II generation. And actually, even before that, if you talk about the people who were involved in World War II, FDR was the president, Harry Truman dropped the bomb, Eisenhower was the general in charge of Europe, and then you have a World War II member, John F. Kennedy, followed by Johnson, member of the same generation, followed by Nixon, member of the same generation, followed by Ford, member of the same generation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way up to George H.W. Bush, who was a young pilot at the end of World War II. And then Bill Clinton became president, member of the baby boomers. What happened to a president from the next generation, the silent generation, the artist generation, the younger brothers and sisters of the World War II generation? There are no presidents. All the presidents since then have been baby boomers. Clinton, followed by George Bush Jr., followed by Obama, followed by Donald Trump, and followed by Joe Biden. They're all baby boomers. So that entire generation was not part of being seriously considered a president, of presidential material, no matter what your politics are. It seems to be that those two generations have dominated politics for nearly 90 years, which is remarkable. So the difference right now is, I think, as I said, that those two generations had something that united them, that had a common culture. Since the advent of cable television, which is incredibly fragmented. You have the students, the children, the millennials, and I suppose you would have to include Generation X, the millennials and Gen Z live in a terribly fragmented world in which there is no common culture for them to grasp, for them to share. And I think if you asked any young student, what shows they watch, they would say they watch a lot of TikTok. Now, what does that mean? That's not saying like you watch a lot of HBO or you watch a lot of ESPN. It's like you're watching, just a potpourri of things that pop up. If you ever watch Reels on Facebook or Instagram, you can get down a rabbit hole pretty quickly as you go into one reel after the other. And the same thing is true, I think, with the kids with their with TikTok. There's nothing. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with TikTok. It's just that there's nothing for them to latch on to to have that common artistic, musical, theatrical culture that I think we had. Once again, that's just an observation, not a criticism, because I think that young people are probably going to do a much better job over the long haul of figuring out what's worthwhile and what's not worthwhile. The problem is that what's out there keeps changing so quickly. It didn't change that much a long time ago. So you think about, as I said, at one time, television was based on three separate channels: ABC, NBC, and CBS. Then when cable came along, it changed the whole idea about what you could watch. So we for us, TV was serendipitous. We watched what was on. The advertisers that were on there really were selling simple things like soap and shampoo and the things everybody needed. And then once cable came along, you began to the networks began to differentiate and to segment their populations as to what they wanted to show them and what they wanted to watch. So if you remember TV back in the 80s and the 90s, Sunday night was what Grandpa and Grandpa watched TV. Murder, She Wrote, Father Dowling Mysteries, that sort of thing. Monday was football. Tuesday and Wednesday was No Man's Land. Thursday was the most popular night for TV. Friday was for the younger kids. And Saturday was for whatever. So rather than broadcasting, as when I was growing up, where they just throw everything at you all at the same time, there was sort of narrowcasting, so that depending upon how old you were, you designed your life around your TV viewing habits, so that you didn't plan anything for Thursday night because you were going to stay home and watch Cheers or Frasier or whatever show was on Thursday night. And then when the internet came along, and you could just simply pick anything you want and just watch the same thing over and over again, where's the need to have a TV channel? So once again, this is New Hampshire Unscripted. I'm Kevin Collins, and we're at WXKL 1450 AM, 103.9 FM, and 101.9 FM in Manchester, or at nhtalkradio.com. We'll talk soon. Hi again, and welcome back. This is New Hampshire Unscripted, and I'm your host, Kevin Collins, filling in for Ray Dudley. You can find us at WKXL 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord, 101.9 FM in Manchester, or at nhtalkradio.com. We've been talking about the history of the teenager. As I said, I was a high school teacher for over 35 years, and I had seen a lot of changes with the students that I had, and how they were impacted by things. And the last thing I was talking about was how in their lives things became very fragmented. Their music became incredibly fragmented. I read off a whole litany of different kinds of music genres, subgenres. Literally, there were hundreds of them. And one of the things I found is that fans of one type of music were not necessarily fans of another type of music, and they might even dislike the people who like that music. You get someone who's into alt music, and they dislike the people who are into K-pop music. So it's an interesting change. We didn't feel that way when we were growing up, simply because we all listened to the same handful of kinds of songs. And so here, so nowadays they live in this terribly fragmented society in which there isn't that doesn't feel like there's a common culture. And one of the downsides of that, of course, is we hear that the students because they're isolated, because they're fragmented, they're lonely. But then again, they say so many adults are experiencing a epidemic of loneliness, and certainly the COVID pandemic exacerbated that even further. But I take a little bit more of a broader view of that change and how our students are coping with it. They're trying to identify things. I know that the idea of gender issues, multiple kinds of genders, sometimes exasperates adults, exasperates an awful lot of people when young people will say that there's not there are different kinds of genders more than just two. And I know but I think in lots of ways, that's a response to the fragmentation of the world around them. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of television stations and shows that you can watch. There are untold thousands of internet sites that you can go to. And as I said, there are so many different kinds of films and music genres. So that if a young person wants to explore the world around them, there are no guideposts. There isn't a central figure trying to identify for them what's popular, what's good, or what's bad. About 25 years ago on PBS, there was a documentary called Merchants of Cool. And what's interesting is that what the host of that show was describing as, and he thought in negative terms, was that young people could no longer find something of their own. It's kind of interesting that even back then, there was some fear that things were getting fragmented, but he was supporting the idea of them people defining their own culture. But every time they tried to define their own culture, big business swallowed it up. And his point was that the Merchants of Cool was based on a story that was in the New Yorker magazine sometime before that there were cool hunters, and what they were is a group of people whose job was to go out and find the kid in the various high schools, mostly in New York, but not necessarily in New York, who were trendsetters. They were the 20% that influenced the other 80%. And the corporations at the time, particularly MTV and the Viacom and those big conglomerates, would go out and find, and they hired these people to go out and find out what was hot so that they could sort of commodify what was hot. So that every time a young influencer in those days went out and discovered something new, big business came in and said, okay, this is going to be hot. We are going to turn it into a commercial product. And so in a sense, whatever might have been separate for the generation became part of big business. Even as if you know anything about the Insane Clown Posse, even they became corporate. Bands like Slipknot, if you know anything about them, became corporate. But what's happened now? What's happened now since then? It's in the last 25 years. Now you have teenage influencers who have their own blogs and vlogs and ways of influencing people and influencing their small cadre, and they can become publishers because it doesn't take much money, if it takes any money at all, to get online and using your cell phone and a few free apps that are available online, you can become an influencer and a content creator. So let me see if I can try to recap, because I know that you've probably been thinking that, wow, this is all really a bit all over the place, which I have been. Generally speaking, I think that when we try to define what the teenager is, it's become more and more elusive as the years have gone on. Certainly it was for me. As I said, when I was a high school teacher, in the beginning there was maybe 12 years difference between me and the students that were in front of me, and so there was some sort of common ground. But with each passing year, they became more and more elusive to me, and it wasn't that I was despairing of what was happening to them. I just found it fascinating, and I do know and I do believe in many ways that our children are capable of navigating the mess that probably we have created for them. It's no man's land. It's a wild west no man's land out there in the internet, with the so many different things competing for their attention, and you only have so much brain space, so much ability to be able to handle all of that. And it was much easier for us because even if we were rebellious, even if we irked our parents, we could rely on each other because we shared, as I say, we shared a common space. We shared a common way of thinking about things and listening to things and doing things. But times have changed, and we adults cannot be able to are not able to tell our children, our students, how to cope with the world in front of them. It may feel that way. But it's not going to happen. They're the ones who are going to be able to navigate this. They'll make the rules. They'll find a way of coping with the confusion that we have put before them. And I think it's very important to remember a few things. One of my favorite teachers was a fellow, the late John Gatto, who was a New York teacher who became New York Teacher of the Year one year, and he wrote some fascinating things that I think that even back in the 80s, 90s he saw, and he said this: "Our school crisis is a reflection of a greater social crisis. We seem to have lost our identity. Children and old people are penned up and locked away from the business of the world to a degree without precedent. Nobody talks to them anymore, and without children and old people mixing in daily life, a community has no future and no past, only a continuous presence. In fact, the name community hardly applies to the way we interact with each other. We live in networks, not communities, and everyone I know is lonely because of that. In some strange way, school is a major actor in this tragedy, just as it is a major actor in the widening gulf among social classes. Using school as a sorting mechanism, we appear to be on the way to creating a caste system, complete with untouchables who wander through subway trains, begging, and sleep on the streets." I don't think we'll get rid of schools anytime soon, he says. Not in my lifetime. Lots to talk about. At any rate, once again, my name is Kevin Collins. This has been New Hampshire Unscripted. I'm covering for Ray Dudley. Please make sure you check him out. And we are online at nhtalkradio.com, WKXL 1450 AM, 103.9 FM Concord, and 101.9 FM in Manchester. Thank you very much, and hope to talk to you again real soon.